You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynne Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 11th of August 2014. Child rapists avoid prosecution by saying sorry. The black flag of ISIS was flying in London until Roman Catholic nun removed it. British jihadi fighting with ISIS in Syria and Iraq stands in front of beheaded man and boasts it's what people want to see. Double murderer allowed to move to Britain to live on human rights grounds. The nuclear reactor Doel 4 near Antwerp has probably been sabotaged. Hamas tunnels plan to target Israeli kindergartens. Oh, by the way, there are tunnels on the US border as well. Saudis calling Pakistani troops for protection against ISIS. Obama on Russia, Russia doesn't make anything. Thought for the day, Islam, the belief and the reality. And finally the juggler and the Scottish doctor. UK news. Child rapists avoid prosecution by saying sorry. 14 sex offenders dodged the courts after admitting their guilt by apologising to their young victims, all aged under 13. Astonishingly, they were dealt with by way of a community resolution originally designed to dispose of minor offences and yob behaviour. Resolutions were also used on 14 people who committed GBH with intent, 2 caught with a knife on school premises and 86 who willfully neglected a child. The black flag of ISIS was flying in London until Roman Catholic nun removed it. At the entrance to Will Crook's estate in Tower Hamlets near Canary Wharf, amid the banners of the hilariously misnamed Stop the War Coalition, End the Siege on Gaza, the black flag of jihad was flying. That is, until it was removed by Sister Christine Frost, a Roman Catholic nun who runs a charity supporting vulnerable residents in the area. The controversial flag sparked outrage after it was pictured flying alongside a number of Palestinian flags and slogans in support of Gaza. World at 8, the unmentionable raised by the unfeeling and taken down by a bride of Christ. I love it. British jihadi fighting with ISIS in Syria and Iraq stands in front of beheaded man and boasts it's what people want to see. A British ISIS fighter posing gleefully in front of a decapitated soldier strung up and murdered in Syria. Abu Abdullah al-Habashi 20, who fled the UK for the Middle East 9 months ago, has no sympathy for the executed man and said people love to see heads on spikes. The Muslim convert is amongst the hundreds of people who have fled the UK to fight in ISIS and says there's no going back. World at 8. Let's hope there's no coming back for this wicked retard or his family, but of course everyone in the UK is entitled to a family life and our money, especially if they kill or rape. We have become Sodom and Gomorrah. Double murderer allowed to move to Britain to live on human rights grounds. Home Secretary Theresa May has been accused of a shocking blunder after it emerged that a double murderer will be allowed to move to Britain and live. The killer from Bangladesh and known as ZR has been given permission to join his family here on human rights grounds. The 45-year-old shopkeeper was jailed for life in Bangladesh in 1990 for murdering 2 people, but granted amnesty in 1997. His application to join his British wife and their 3 children was originally refused. The Home Office argued that letting a double murderer into the country was not in the public interest, but the decision was reversed at an appeal hearing. It was ruled he could come to the UK under Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which protects a right to private and family life. Home Office lawyers failed to lodge an appeal against the ruling in time, so the judgment stands. A lifelong anonymity order also prevents the killer from being identified. A Home Office spokesman said the law has since been changed and the right to a family life is now not to be regarded as absolute and unqualified. The number of foreign felons who avoided deportation rose by 50% last year. Figures show that up to 1,310 inmates considered for removal from Britain stayed here, up from 890 the previous year. World at 8. We are truly a very odd nation. Is this wife really English or just British born? It is the way of these people to send their wives and kids in first to get all the benefits and the homes, and then come along illegally and have the rights that are so often denied our own tribes. Deport the whole bunch of them back to his homeland. European news. The nuclear reactor Doel 4 near Antwerp has probably been sabotaged. The reactor automatically came to a standstill on Tuesday due to an oil leak. The first assumption was that this was due to a technical failure, but now it turns out the incident was most probably the result of a deliberate act. Investigation into the incident showed the tank containing lubricating oil had been opened, probably a deliberate move by somebody, explains Geeta Kayet of Electrable that manages the nuclear power point. Ms Kayet suggested it's a type of sabotage, as this incident cannot happen without someone's deliberate move. However, she doesn't want to go into further details. Asked whether she has any idea who could have done it and why, she told the VRT the nuclear watchdog FANC has started an investigation and we will wait for the results first. Electrable is hoping to restart the nuclear reactor by 4th of August. World news. Hamas tunnels plan to target Israeli kindergartens. Oh, by the way, there are tunnels on the US border as well. From Alan B. West, a commentator in the USA. Who in the United States would allow Mexican drug cartels to dig tunnels into the United States and attack border cities and schools? Oops, the tunnels already exist here. I wonder where they got that idea. The system of tunnels in Gaza and Israel had to cost millions of dollars, and the manpower required isn't trivial, nor is the construction design. One just has to believe this is financed by Qatar and others and militarily supported by Iran, to whom we are releasing more millions of dollars as sanctions are eased. But how could John Kerry, knowing this battlefield intelligence, promise to give Hamas 47 million American taxpayer dollars? I can surely surmise that if Hamas is not completely destroyed, those funds will go to rebuilding these tunnels. As previously reported here, this sophistication and know-how is being copied right now by Mexico-based Hezbollah agents along the southern US border. World at 8. But of course in the UK we have the ferries and the Channel. Saudis call in Pakistani troops for protection against ISIS. 4th of August 2014. As ISIS members say they want to sack the holy city, Riyadh calls in military assistance from its close allies to shore up the porous 500-mile border. Saudi Arabia has deployed thousands of troops from Egypt and Pakistan along its frontier with Iraq, amid fears of invasion by the Al-Qaeda splinter group that has declared a radical Islamic State across the border. Panicked by the advance of the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham ISIS, Riyadh has taken the drastic step of calling in military assistance from its close allies to shore up the porous 500-mile border, Gulf security sources said. Saudi Arabia spent an estimated £35 billion on defence last year, leapfrogging Britain as the world's 4th largest military spender. The massive outlay highlights Riyadh's unease about whether its defences would hold if the jihadists launched a direct attack. World at 8, so the Saudis hoisted on their own petard. Leave it to 'em, mateys. Obama on Russia. Russia doesn't make anything. On the 2nd of August 2014, Barack Obama said, "I think President Putin represents a deep strain in Russia that is probably harmful to Russia over the long term, but in the short term can be politically popular at home and very troublesome abroad. But I do think it's important to keep perspective. Russia doesn't make anything. Immigrants aren't rushing to Moscow in search of opportunity. The life expectancy of the Russian male is around 60 years old. The population is shrinking. And so we have to respond with resolve in what effectively regional challenges that Russia presents. We have to make sure they don't escalate where suddenly nuclear weapons are back in the discussion of foreign policy. As long as we do that, then I think history is on our side." World at 8. This guy might have helped blacks in the States, but he sure is a bit of a numpty, isn't he? Of course immigrants aren't flocking there. They aren't welcome there, as they're not welcome in India, China, Japan, Africa, Arabia and the Middle East. Why? Because people of those lands would rather feed themselves than foreigners. Idiot! And leave the Russians alone. They are the only thing standing between us and the overpopulated land of China. Thought for the day. Islam, the belief and the reality. Most organised religions have places of worship, meeting halls and a good book in which are laid out rules and regulations for the worship and practice of those religions. A well-known Marxist idiot, whom I've forgotten the name of, said that without religion nations would prosper, and here I would have to disagree. In England, the first official body to allow people to learn to read was the church, although one might have had to become a nun or a monk. The landowners didn't like this at all, as it was only the rich, apart from the priests, thus throughout Europe. The first rules of European society were written by the church. The first book printed was the Bible, and so on. Without rules and regulations, anarchy reigns, which means retards with some warped idea of freedom from anything rule except freedom from them. So we have established that man in all his glory needs religion of one form or another, or, to be fair, a set of self-belief that will guide him through life. So I'm certainly not anti-religion in all its forms and cultures. The so-called hypocrisy of religions are in fact the hypocrisy of man himself transferred. A Hindu will allow people not of his caste to starve at his back door. A Sikh will cheerfully kill anyone who attacks him. A Christian will rarely turn the other cheek or bellow his faith from the rooftops, although cash in on secret societies to further his own ends. And the Jews, bless them, well, they have religion and living down to a fine art. They forget to observe their holy days whilst using that time to propagandise people and make millions out of history. Now you'll note I've left out Islam, because Islam is a very different animal indeed. If you see pictures of Egypt pre-World War II, rather like China and Germany, you will see a cosmopolitan society, the poor relying on the wealthy tourism, as in Lebanon in pre-sectarian days in the 70s, a shining light of East and West meeting and existing in relative calm. The Middle East in those days was multilingual, multi-religious and multi-ethnic, and our diversity and rainbow brothers and sisters might well say, well, it is what we have over here now, and they would be so wrong in every way and on every level. The last war somehow pricked the big shiny arse of Islam and showed them that if the Germans could wage war against what was in effect their own tribes, then so could they, and rummaged around in their history and found that yes, they did reach the gates of Vienna in 1683. And I quote, "The battle was won by the combined forces of the Holy Roman Empire, the German nation, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the latter being represented only by the forces of the Crown of the Kingdom of Poland. The march of the Lithuanian army was delayed as a result they arrived in Vienna after it was relieved. The Viennese garrison was led by Ernst Rudiger Graf von Starrenberg, an Austrian subject of Leopold I, Holy Roman Emperor. The overall command was held by the commander of the Polish forces, the King of Poland, Jan III Sobieski. The alliance fought the army of the Ottoman Empire and those of Ottoman fiefdoms commanded by Grand Vizier Mirzi von Lucara Mustafa Pasha. The siege itself began on the 14th of July 1683 by the Ottoman Empire army of approximately 90,000 to 300,000 men. The besieging force was composed of 60 autos of Janissaries, 12,000 men paper strength, with an observation army of 70,000 men watching the countryside. The decisive battle took place on the 12th of September after the United Relief Army of approximately 84,000 men had arrived. Now the basic difference between then and now is simple. They have come back, and not under a Grand Vizier Mustafa Pasha, but a migrant rabble of 80 million to date throughout Europe. Not with a huge army of Janissaries, but under the whinging, whining guise of asylum seekers and needing help. When in fact the only help most of these Muslims want is financial help to start vast families within the countries they have chosen to colonise. They are now well established in this country, and it is the voting public who have allowed this to happen. In days of old, more than a few migrant communities having reached a certain number would have been dispatched through fire and sword, and no questions asked or even written about in the history books. It happened with the Jews, the Lutherans, the Huguenots, the Flemings, the Danes and the Vikings, and even the poor old Romans gave up with Britannia eons ago. Yet it hasn't happened with the Muslims, and they are a fine example of what a man-made religion can do to a people. Because although it passes for a religion, it really isn't. Taking the one God idea from the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaton, the Christians and the Jews, and putting a so-called prophet at the helm, not a godlike figure at all, but one which has and is continuing to lay out strict rules and regulations for life for worshippers at his particular altar. In days of old we didn't have Israel in its present form, but it was there. The Arab League after World War I mucked up the few Palestinian goat herders present in Gaza at that time, and there was a need when Jerusalem was predominantly Christian and Judaic. Now, I've never seen the need for Muslims in Jerusalem because Jerusalem started out a pagan city, then became Jewish and then Christian. At no time did Muhammad live or visit Jerusalem, I believe. But like all Muslims, the term cockroaches comes to mind, but as I happen to admire cockroaches, great survivors, I'll just call the Muslims a Muslim. It must become apparent even to the thickest amongst us that the Muslim problem is getting greater. They are now calling on the spirit of jihad to avenge things both real and unreal, and good old Britain is once again becoming the U-turn in the plumbing bend of supplying these indoctrinated idiots with more so-called British-born soldiers, who we will in turn no doubt welcome back, or at the very least in the true British sense ignore when they return to the bosom of their ghettoised families. Alias coming to a town near you, matey. Now, I'm a simple person with a simple view of life, and that is when a person or persons intrudes into your home without asking, you boot them out and call the police. Now, we don't have this attitude anymore in this country. It has all been propagandised out over the last 60 years, along with any peace the Middle East might have enjoyed. The mixture of American democracy centring around black gold and Islamic morons getting it on with killing thousands, and the European stance of if we ignore it, it will go away, which clearly it is not and is not working. The Middle East has become a hellhole even for the sodding Muslims. No Arabian Nights tales there either, and now with a virtual standing army of around 80 million and still breeding Muslims in the UK and Europe, there is no gates of Vienna for us. Apart from the fact that we have as a nation for the last 60 to 70 years allowed all and sundry into an already packed country with its own culture, history and identity, which have been all but subverted into so-called diversity or the raising of the often foreign idiot above the white professor brigade, we as a people keep voting in or ignoring the people that are doing it. What other country in the world needs a nationalist party that isn't a jihadi one? You tell me. If the correct rules had been made and adhered to after the war, we would not have needed to exist. There would not have been the massive and unnecessary immigration, and all the troubles, crime and strain on our marvellous health service, education, housing, feeding, etc. would not have existed. In fact, immigration between 1995 and 2011 cost the taxpayer more than £140 billion, or £22 million a day, after balancing what immigrants pay in tax with what they take out of Britain's coffers by claiming benefits and tax credit. It was reported in the Telegraph this March. You will note they're only quoting the years 95 to 2011, when in fact immigration has been in full swing for over 50 years. So just imagine how much money has vanished into that pot. And of course they're not taking into account the children produced and the elderly relatives regularly bust in. Now, this is the way in which Islam primarily is operating. Move to a country, marry, have a huge family for which you need not pay, either in the birthing thereof or the education, marry them off and start all over again. How else do you account for the fact we've lost, as a country, our capital city and all of the larger cities in the Midlands and North? It is by design, and we and our progeny have contributed to it. When did you last hear church bells? Even if not a regular churchgoer, Sunday was church bell day, and even if annoying at the time, it was certainly better than the foreign call to prayer being allowed in certain areas of this country now. Talk about the call of the banshee. Islam is a creeping destroyer, rather like Japanese knotweed. Once there, you need to blast the ground to get rid of it. By our stupid actions abroad, and by that I mean the West, we have now given them something to offend them, which, let's face it, is a regular event. Obama trained and backed these ISIS terrorists in Libya, Egypt and Syria, and is now helping out in Iraq, not because of the Christians who are being murdered on a regular basis for the last couple of years there, but this strange, almost prehistoric sect of all the religions jumbled together, the Yazidis. And let me make this clear, these people are in need of international aid. But so were the Iraqi Christians in Mosul, and yet not an international whimper. So does this mean that Christians do not deserve international help? Are we to be treated on the TV to millions of pictures of dead Muslim children and possibly dead Yazidi children, but never dead Christian children? So how soon or how long will it take for what Christians we have left in this country to become endangered or dead? Will the world even notice? Will Europe come to our aid? Will we be allowed to bear arms and defend ourselves, or end up in a mountain in Snowdonia being given airlifted food packs whilst the Muslims wait below? It's awful to see on the web adopt a Christian from Mosul to respond directly to Iraq's emergency. Asia News is launching a fundraiser to support Christians targeted by the Islamic State, thus responding to a request by the Patriarch of Baghdad and Pope Francis' urgent appeal to guarantee all necessary assistance, especially the most urgently needed aid, to the great multitude of people who have been driven from their homes, whose fate depends entirely on the solidarity of others. More than 100,000 people have been forced to flee their homes, leaving everything behind, and now have nothing to live on. To help them, €5 a day are enough. The funds raised will be sent to the Patriarchate of Baghdad, which will distribute them according to the needs of each family. Now this is sad and true. Non-Muslims are being killed, raped, converted, crucified and buried alive, and these acts are being perpetrated by the followers of Islam. And however other so-called peaceful Muslims react by distancing themselves, it is still Islam that is responsible for most of the genocide throughout Africa, the Middle East, Arabia and parts of the Far East. These acts of atrocity are not being committed by an alien intelligence or on a computer game. They are real, and they could come to a town near you without any warning from our establishment. And finally, a juggler and the Scottish doctor. A North Carolina state trooper pulled a car over on US 301 about 2 miles south of the Virginia state line. When the trooper asked the driver why he was speeding, the driver said he was a juggler and was on his way to do a show at the Shrine Circus in Emporia. He didn't want to be late. The trooper told the driver he was fascinated by juggling and said if a driver would do a little juggling for him then he wouldn't give him a ticket. He told the trooper he had sent his equipment ahead and didn't have anything to juggle. The trooper said he had some flares in the trunk and asked if he could juggle them. The juggler said he could. So the trooper got 5 flares, lit them and handed them to him. While the man was juggling, a car pulled in behind the patrol car. A drunken good old boy travelling from Tennessee got out, watched the performance, then went over to the patrol car, opened the rear door and got in. The trooper observed him and went over to the patrol car, opened the door, asking the drunk what he thought he was doing. The drunk replied, "You might as well take my ass to jail, 'cause there ain't no way in hell I can pass that test." And the Scottish doctor, and you're going to have to leave it because my Glasgow accent is not good. A woman goes to a doctor in Glasgow, worried about her husband's temper and threatening manner. The doc asks, "What's the problem, Janet?" The woman says, "Well, Dr. Cameron, I dinna know what to do. Every time my hubby comes home he threatens to slab me aroon." The doctor says, "Aye, well, I have a real good cure for that. When your husband arrives home intoxicated, just take a wee glass of water and start swishing it around in your mouth. Just swish and swish, but don't swallow it until he goes to bed and is sound asleep." 2 weeks later she comes back to the doctor looking fresh and reborn. She says, "Doctor, that was brilliant. Every time my hubby came home drunk I swished with water. I swished and he didn't touch me even once." "Tell me, Doc, what's the secret? How's the water do that?" The doctor says, "Janet, it's really nae a big secret. The water does bugger all. It's keeping your mouth shut that does the trick." You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynne Mozar and I wish you all a very good night.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynne Mozar. The World at 8, the #1 in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 11th of August 2014. Child rapists avoid prosecution by saying sorry. The black flag of ISIS was flying in London until Roman Catholic nun removed it. British jihadi fighting with ISIS in Syria and Iraq stands in front of beheaded man and birds to sea. A British ISIS fighter posing gleefully in front of a decapitated soldier strung up and murdered in Syria. Abu Abdullah al-Habashi, 20, who fled the UK for the Middle East 9 months ago, has no sympathy for the executed man and said people love to see heads on spikes. The Muslim convert is amongst the hundreds of people who have fled the UK to fight in ISIS and says there's no going back. World date. Let's hope there's no coming back for this wicked retard or his family, but of course everyone in the UK is entitled to a family life and our money, especially if they kill or rape. We have become Sodom and Gomorrah. End the siege on Gaza. The black flag of jihad was flying. That is, until it was removed by Sister Christine Frost, a Roman Catholic nun who runs a charity supporting vulnerable residents in the area. The controversial flag sparked outrage after it was pictured flying alongside a number of Palestinian flags and slogans in support of Gaza. World date. The unmentionable, raised by the unfeeling and taken down by a bride of Christ. I love it. British jihadi fighting with ISIS in Syria and Iraq stands in front of a beheaded man and boasts it's what people want to see. Double murderer allowed to move to Britain to live on human rights grounds. The nuclear reactor Doel 4 near Antwerp has probably been sabotaged. Hamas tunnels plan to target Israeli kindergartens. Oh, by the way, there are tunnels on the US border as well. Saudis calling Pakistani troops for protection against ISIS. Obama on Russia. Russia doesn't make anything. Thought for the day. Islam, the belief and the reality. And finally the juggler and the Scottish doctor. UK news. Child rapists avoid prosecution by saying sorry. 14 sex offenders dodged the courts after admitting their guilt by apologising to their young victims, all aged under 13. Astonishingly, they were dealt with by way of a community resolution originally designed to dispose of minor offences and yob behaviour. Resolutions were also used on 14 people who committed GBH with intent, 2 caught with a knife on school premises and 86 who willfully neglected a child. The black flag of ISIS was flying in London until Roman Catholic nun removed it. At the entrance to Will Crook's estate in Tower Hamlets near Canary Wharf, amid the banners of the hilariously misnamed Stop the War Coalition,